Hey man, there comes a point where the truth stops feeling emotional and starts feeling obvious. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. It's the moment you realize that all the confusion, overthinking, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion you went through wasn't because you didn't try hard enough. It was because the situation itself was never aligned with who you are. And once that realization settles, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. She's not worth it, not because she's a bad person, not because she failed you intentionally, but because the cost of staying exceeded the value of what you were receiving. Most men struggle with this realization because they confuse effort with meaning. They believe that if something required pain, sacrifice, and patience, it must have been important. But effort alone doesn't define worth. Effort can be wasted just as easily as it can be invested. And when you look back honestly, you start seeing how much energy went into managing uncertainty rather than building something stable. You weren't growing together. You were compensating alone. At first, it's hard to accept this because your mind wants to protect the time you invested. It wants to believe that the late nights thinking, the emotional restraint, the compromises, and the silence all meant something permanent. But meaning isn't assigned retroactively by suffering. Meaning is revealed through consistency. And when consistency was missing, the value was never truly there. Only the illusion of potential. This is where most men get stuck. They don't miss her as a person. They miss the version of themselves that believed things would eventually make sense. They miss the hope that clarity would arrive if they just waited long enough. But hope without evidence isn't strength, it's delay. And delay is expensive when it keeps you emotionally tied to something that isn't moving forward. Once you step back, you begin noticing how much of the relationship revolved around interpretation instead of reality, reading tone, analyzing timing, decoding silence, explaining yourself repeatedly just to maintain balance. That isn't connection, that's emotional labor. And emotional labor without reciprocity drains you quietly until one day you realize you're tired for no clear reason. This is when the idea that she's not worth it stops feeling harsh and starts feeling accurate. Worth isn't about attraction or history. It's about whether your presence is valued without negotiation, whether your effort is met without conditions, whether your peace is protected rather than disrupted. And if you had to constantly earn basic stability, then the cost was never justified. Men often resist this truth because walking away feels like failure, like admitting defeat. But walking away from misalignment isn't quitting, it's correction. You're not abandoning something good. You're removing yourself from something that required you to shrink, wait, or overextend just to remain relevant. What hurts most isn't losing her, it's realizing how long you stayed after your intuition already knew. How many moments you ignored discomfort because you didn't want to let go of the idea that things could improve. But improvement doesn't come from endurance alone. It comes from mutual effort, and mutual effort was never consistent here. When you finally accept that she's not worth it, something unexpected happens. The emotional fog lifts. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering what you could have said differently. Because clarity doesn't need rewriting. It settles in and removes the need for justification entirely. This realization isn't bitter. It's grounding. It doesn't turn you cold. It turns you honest. Honest about what you're willing to tolerate. Honest about the kind of connection you actually want. And once you reach that honesty, you stop wasting emotional energy trying to save situations that were never built to last. As this clarity settles, you begin to see how much of your attachment was rooted in expectation rather than reality. You weren't responding to what was happening. You were responding to what you believed could happen if circumstances finally aligned. That gap between reality and expectation is where most emotional suffering lives. And once that gap closes, the attachment weakens on its own. You start noticing how often you gave the benefit of the doubt while receiving very little certainty in return. How you normalized inconsistency by calling it complexity. How you excused emotional distance by labeling it independence. These weren't signs of depth. They were signs of imbalance. You learned to tolerate instead of question. What becomes obvious now is that real connection doesn't require constant interpretation. It doesn't make you feel unsure about where you stand. It doesn't demand that you monitor your words, your tone, or your timing just to maintain stability. If something required that level of self-editing, it was already costing you more than it was giving. This is where self-respect quietly returns, not as pride, not as anger, but as boundary. You realize that your emotional availability is valuable, and giving it to someone who can't meet it consistently is a misuse of that value, not because they're incapable, but because they're incompatible with the level you operate on. You may also recognize how much of your patience came from fear rather than confidence. Fear of starting over, fear of being alone, fear that walking away would erase the time you invested. But time isn't erased when you leave misalignment. It's reclaimed. You stop spending it in a place that doesn't return it. At this stage, memories lose their emotional grip, not because they weren't meaningful, but because they're placed accurately. You no longer inflate the good moments to justify the bad ones. You see the whole picture without distortion. And seeing clearly removes attachment more effectively than forcing distance ever could. You also stop personalizing her behavior. You understand now that what she gave was all she was willing or able to give. And that limitation wasn't something you could negotiate away. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. This realization frees you from the need to prove anything. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need apologies. You don't need acknowledgement. Because acknowledgement only matters when you doubt your own judgment, and you don't anymore. The emotional space you regain becomes noticeable. Your thoughts feel quieter. Your reactions feel slower. You're no longer emotionally bracing for uncertainty. And that calm isn't emptiness, it's stability returning to where it belongs. This is when the statement "she's not worth it" fully lands, not as resentment, but as resolution. You're not angry, you're finished. And being finished without bitterness is one of the strongest positions a man can reach. From this place, you start recognizing how much emotional noise you mistook for connection. The ups and downs felt intense, so you assumed they meant something profound was happening. But intensity isn't depth, it's volatility. And volatility keeps you focused on survival instead of growth. Once you step out of it, you realize how draining that constant emotional adjustment really was. You also notice how rarely you felt truly at ease. Not excited, not hopeful, at ease. The kind of ease where you don't have to monitor the situation or anticipate shifts. That absence wasn't accidental, it was a signal. And signals ignored don't disappear. They accumulate until they force a decision. This is where your standards begin to sharpen naturally, not because you became more demanding, but because you became more aware. You understand now that consistency is not a luxury, it's a requirement, and anyone who treats it as optional is asking you to pay an emotional price you no longer accept. You might also realize that much of what you called chemistry was actually anxiety. The unpredictability kept you engaged, the uncertainty kept you alert. But real chemistry doesn't keep you on edge, it expands you. It gives you space to breathe, not reasons to brace yourself. As this understanding deepens, your attachment dissolves without effort. You don't force yourself to let go. You don't repeat affirmations, you simply see clearly. And clarity doesn't argue, it releases. Once you know something isn't worth the cost, the desire to keep paying fades on its own. This is also when you stop fantasizing about how things could have been. Potential loses its power when it's no longer supported by action. You realize that potential without follow-through is just a story you were telling yourself to delay disappointment. You begin valuing your emotional energy differently. You no longer spend it trying to stabilize situations that resist stability. You invest it where it's matched, where effort doesn't feel like negotiation, where presence doesn't feel like pressure. At this stage, even the idea of reconnecting feels hollow. Not tempting, not dramatic, just unnecessary. Because the clarity you've gained outweighs the comfort of familiarity, and once clarity outweighs comfort, you don't go backward. You may notice that your reactions to other people change too. You're less tolerant of mixed signals, less patient with inconsistency, not out of bitterness, but because your nervous system now recognizes imbalance immediately. It doesn't need time to justify it anymore. This is the quiet turning point, the moment when you no longer need to convince yourself that she's not worth it. You simply know, and knowing replaces attachment far more effectively than willpower ever could. From here, your perspective shifts from recovery to recalibration. You're no longer asking how to feel better about what happened. You're adjusting how you choose. Moving forward, the focus turns inward. What you tolerate, what you invest in, what you walk away from early, instead of enduring silently. And that inward shift is where real power returns. You begin to notice how calm feels unfamiliar at first. Not boring, just quiet. There's no emotional spike pulling your attention. No uncertainty demanding resolution. And in that quiet, you realize how much of your previous attachment was fueled by tension rather than connection. This is when you stop romanticizing emotional struggle. You understand that difficulty doesn't automatically equal value. Some things are hard because they're meaningful. Others are hard because they're wrong for you. Learning the difference saves years of emotional energy. you also recognize how little effort it now takes to maintain your peace. You're not managing someone else's mood. You're not over-explaining yourself. You're not waiting for reassurance. That absence of emotional labor feels like relief, not because you escaped something terrible, but because you returned to something natural. At this stage, the memory of her loses emotional authority. You don't suppress it, you don't avoid it, you just don't orient yourself around it anymore. It exists without influence, and when something exists without influence, it's no longer attachment, it's history. Your standards solidify without needing to be spoken aloud. You don't announce boundaries, you don't warn people, you simply respond less, where effort isn't mutual, and that quiet response communicates more than any explanation ever could. You may notice that people respond differently to you now, not because you're trying to project confidence, but because you're no longer negotiating your value. You're present, but not dependent, interested, but not invested prematurely. That balance changes dynamics immediately. This is where the phrase, "she's not worth it," transforms again. It no longer refers to her specifically. It becomes a filter, a standard you apply to situations that require too much compromise for too little return, and that filter protects you effortlessly. You also stop feeling the need to justify your decision to anyone, not friends, not yourself. When clarity is genuine, it doesn't need reinforcement. It holds on its own, and holding on its own is what makes it stable. By now, you're no longer moving away from her. You're moving toward alignment, and alignment doesn't carry resentment. It carries direction. You're not closed off, you're calibrated, and that calibration ensures you never confuse emotional effort with emotional value again. From this point on, you start recognizing patterns much earlier, not just in romantic situations, but in people in general. You notice who shows up consistently and who only appears when it's convenient, who communicates clearly and who hides behind ambiguity. And because you're no longer emotionally hungry, these patterns don't confuse you, they inform you. You also stop mistaking attraction for compatibility. Attraction is easy, it's instinctive. Compatibility is revealed over time, under pressure, through consistency. And once you've lived through misalignment, your nervous system becomes very good at telling the difference before your emotions get involved. This is where emotional efficiency develops. You don't overinvest early, you don't rush intimacy. You let things unfold at a pace that allows reality to surface. And if reality doesn't match what you need, you disengage without internal conflict. What once would have triggered anxiety now barely registers. Delayed responses, shifting energy, vague intentions. These aren't mysteries anymore, they're information. And information doesn't hurt, it clarifies. You also realize how much emotional bandwidth you've reclaimed. Your focus improves, your patience deepens, your reactions slow down. You're no longer leaking energy into situations that don't deserve it. That reclaimed energy naturally redirects into your work, your health, your goals. At this stage, even the idea of proving your worth feels foreign. Worth isn't proven, it's recognized. And recognition only happens when you're willing to walk away from environments that don't acknowledge it. This shift also changes how you handle rejection. You don't personalize it, you don't internalize it. You see it as a sorting mechanism, not a verdict. If something doesn't align, it simply isn't for you. No story required. You may notice that peace becomes your baseline rather than your reward. You're not chasing it anymore, you're protecting it. And protection doesn't require effort, it requires discernment. By now, the emotional loop that once kept you stuck feels distant. You don't feel tempted to revisit it, not because you're disciplined, but because the clarity you've gained outweighs any pull toward familiarity. This is the quiet end of the cycle, not closure through conversation, not healing through explanation, but resolution through understanding. You didn't lose something valuable. You stopped investing in something that cost you more than it gave. And from here on, that understanding guides you forward without resistance. From here, you stop measuring relationships by how intense they feel and start measuring them by how sustainable they are. You ask yourself a simple question without forcing an answer. Does this add clarity to my life, or does it create noise? And once you ask that honestly, a lot of situations disqualify themselves without conflict. You also begin to trust your initial discomfort again, not the anxious kind, but the quiet signal that something isn't aligned. Before, you overrode that signal with logic, patience, and optimism. Now you respect it, because every time you ignored it in the past, it eventually proved right. This is where emotional discipline replaces emotional endurance. You no longer pride yourself on how much you can tolerate. You value how quickly you can recognize when something isn't worth continuing. and that shift alone saves you years of unnecessary strain. You might notice that you no longer feel the urge to fix people. You don't interpret inconsistency as something that just needs more understanding. You accept people as they are, not as they could be under ideal conditions, and acceptance brings detachment without bitterness. At this stage, attraction starts functioning differently. You're still drawn to beauty, intelligence, and energy, but those qualities don't override stability anymore. If emotional steadiness isn't present, interest fades naturally. There's no inner debate, no rationalization, just clarity. You also stop romanticizing struggle. The idea that love has to be hard loses its grip. You understand now that love can be challenging without being destabilizing, and anything that repeatedly destabilizes you isn't deep, it's draining. This clarity changes how you show up. You're less reactive, less eager to explain yourself, less willing to negotiate basic respect, not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. And grounded men don't chase alignment, they attract it. You may find that people either rise to this level or fade out quickly. There's no middle ground anymore. And that's not harsh, it's efficient. You're no longer available for half-effort connections that rely on your patience to survive. At this point, the statement "she's not worth it" becomes fully depersonalized. It's no longer about her, it's about alignment versus cost. If the cost is peace, clarity, and self-respect, the answer is always the same, no matter who it is. And this is where the chapter truly ends. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with certainty. You don't need distance to stay detached anymore. You don't need reminders, you've recalibrated. And once a man recalibrates his standards, he doesn't return to situations that require him to betray himself just to stay connected. From this place of certainty, you stop narrating your decisions internally. There's no inner monologue trying to justify why you left or why you won't go back. The decision has already settled beneath thought, and when a decision settles that deep, it doesn't ask to be defended. It simply exists as part of who you are now. You may notice that your emotional reactions become simpler, not muted, simpler. Things either align or they don't. There's less bargaining with yourself, less stretching your tolerance to make something fit. You don't ask, "Can I live with this?" You ask, "Do I want to?" And that question changes everything. This is where you realize how much of your past patience was actually self-betrayal, dressed up as maturity. You weren't being strong by staying, you were being hopeful. And hope, when unsupported by action, quietly drains self-trust. Leaving restored that trust in a way staying never could. Your emotional baseline becomes steadier now. Not excited, not detached, steady. You're no longer oscillating between anticipation and disappointment. And once that oscillation ends, your nervous system finally rests. That rest alone becomes more valuable than any emotional high you once chased. You also stop needing reassurance from outcomes. Whether she regrets it, understands it, or reframes it, doesn't matter anymore. Your peace isn't contingent on her perspective. And when your peace isn't contingent, it becomes durable. This is where indifference gets misunderstood by outsiders. They might call it coldness or distance, but it isn't absence of feeling. It's absence of dependence. You still care. You're just no longer attached to being understood by someone who couldn't meet you consistently. At this stage, even nostalgia loses its pull. Memories arise without grabbing you. They don't invite longing, they pass through like weather. And when memories lose their grip, you know you've integrated the experience instead of storing it unresolved. You may also notice how quickly you disengage from new situations that resemble the old pattern. There's no drama, no warning, just a quiet reduction of effort. You don't punish, you don't confront, you simply stop investing where alignment isn't present. This quiet disengagement is the real upgrade, not because it protects your ego, but because it protects your time. Time is the one resource you no longer gamble with emotionally. If something demands too much clarity seeking, it already failed the test. And this is the final truth behind the phrase, "she's not worth it." It doesn't come from anger, it comes from discernment. You didn't harden, you refined. And once a man refines his standards at this level, he doesn't feel lost when he walks away. He feels relief that he listened to himself in time. From here on, you start realizing that peace is not something you have to earn through endurance. It's something that naturally appears when you stop placing yourself in situations that require constant emotional adjustment. You don't feel proud of leaving, you feel lighter, and that lightness tells you everything you need to know. You also stop asking yourself whether you were too harsh, too impatient, or too quick to judge. Those questions belong to an earlier version of you. the one who still believed clarity required consensus. Now you understand that alignment doesn't need permission. If something feels wrong consistently, leaving is not impulsive, it's accurate. This is where self-trust becomes permanent. You no longer second-guess your instincts after the fact. You don't replay moments wondering if you misread them. You know what you felt, you know why you left, and that certainty doesn't wobble with time. You may notice that emotional availability feels different now. You're still open, but you're selective. You don't give access quickly, and you don't maintain it through effort alone. If someone wants space, you give it fully. If someone gives inconsistency, you step back without resentment. At this stage, you finally understand that attachment doesn't come from love alone. It comes from tolerance of discomfort. Once you remove that tolerance, unhealthy attachment dissolves naturally. You don't fight it, you outgrow it. You also stop mistaking emotional familiarity for connection. Just because someone feels familiar doesn't mean they're right for you. Familiarity can come from repetition, not alignment, and alignment is what actually sustains long-term peace. Your internal dialogue becomes quieter now, not empty, focused. You're no longer explaining yourself internally or externally. You're acting from a place of internal agreement. And when your thoughts and actions match, there's no friction inside you. This is when you realize how much emotional noise you once accepted as normal. The guessing, the waiting, the adjusting, the hoping, all of that fades, and what replaces it is clarity that doesn't fluctuate with someone else's mood. You don't feel the need to warn others anymore. You don't feel the need to preach lessons. You understand that people learn when they're ready, not when they're told. Your job isn't to convince anyone, it's to live in alignment with what you've learned. And this is the quiet conclusion. She's not worth it, not because she lacked value, but because the version of life you want no longer includes emotional instability. You didn't lose her, you chose yourself. And once that choice is made at this level, you don't revisit it. From this stage forward, you stop framing the past as something that happened to you and start seeing it as something that refined you. Not in a motivational sense, in a practical one. Your tolerance narrowed, your perception sharpened, your emotional reaction slowed, and those changes aren't temporary, they're structural. You may notice that even when loneliness appears, it no longer drives your decisions. It registers, passes, and leaves without pulling you back toward familiar chaos. You've learned the difference between missing connection and missing peace, and peace, once experienced fully, is not something you trade away lightly. This is where emotional self-sufficiency locks in. Not isolation, not avoidance. Self-sufficiency. You enjoy connection, but you don't depend on it to feel stable. And that independence removes the urgency that once pushed you into misaligned situations. You also become aware that your standards don't need defending. When someone questions why you won't tolerate certain dynamics anymore, you don't explain. Explanation is for negotiation. You're no longer negotiating with yourself or others about what you require to stay grounded. At this point, you can sense misalignment almost immediately. Not because you're cynical, but because you're attentive. Your body responds faster than your thoughts. And instead of overriding that response, you respect it. That respect keeps you from repeating old patterns. You may also notice that emotional attraction now follows stability instead of preceding it. You don't attach first and evaluate later. You observe first. You let consistency reveal itself, and if it doesn't, interest fades without conflict. This changes how people experience you. You're calmer, but less accessible, present, but not available for confusion. And that combination creates a different kind of respect. One that doesn't come from intensity, but from boundaries that don't need reinforcement. You no longer seek closure from people who couldn't meet you where you stood. Closure came from alignment, not conversation. And once alignment is restored internally, external resolution becomes irrelevant. The past no longer feels like something you escaped. It feels like something you completed. Completion doesn't ask for validation. It doesn't reopen. It simply sits where it belongs, behind you, without weight. This is the deeper meaning behind saying she's not worth it. It's not dismissal, it's discernment. You didn't devalue her, you revalued yourself. And once that recalibration is complete, you don't move backward, not out of pride, but out of peace. From here, something subtle but permanent settles in. You no longer measure your progress by how little you think about her. You measure it by how naturally your life moves without reference to her at all. That's when you know detachment is complete. Not when emotion disappears, but when relevance does. You may still remember her from time to time, but the memory no longer carries instruction. It doesn't tell you what to feel, what to fix, or what to regret. It's just information from a chapter that already served its purpose, and information without emotional charge can't pull you backward. This is where emotional freedom becomes obvious. You don't feel closed. You don't feel guarded. You feel unburdened. There's nothing unresolved inside you that needs another person to make sense of it. And that internal resolution is what most people spend years trying to achieve through external validation. You also stop fearing future connections, not because you're optimistic, but because you trust your discernment now. You know you'll recognize misalignment early. You know you'll leave without self-betrayal. That trust removes fear at the root. At this stage, the past relationship stops being a warning and becomes a reference, a quiet marker that reminds you what emotional imbalance costs. You don't dwell on it, you don't resent it, you simply don't ignore the lesson anymore. You may notice that your attraction shifts toward calm, consistency, and emotional maturity. Drama no longer excites you. Uncertainty no longer intrigues you. Those things once felt like depth, now they feel inefficient. And efficiency in emotional life is a form of wisdom. This is also where you realize how rare this level of clarity actually is. Many people stay stuck because they confuse longing with meaning. You didn't. You let clarity replace attachment, and clarity always wins when it's allowed to. You don't feel the need to declare that she wasn't worth it anymore. The statement doesn't even come up internally. The truth is embodied now. It's in how you choose, how you disengage, how you protect your peace without aggression or explanation. What remains is a quiet confidence that doesn't seek proof. You don't need to be chosen to feel valuable. You don't need to be understood to feel grounded. You've stopped outsourcing certainty to anyone else. And that's the real ending. Not bitterness, not revenge, not indifference, but self-alignment, so complete that the past no longer has leverage. She's not worth it. Not because she failed, but because you finally chose a life that doesn't require emotional self-sacrifice to feel whole.